Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we are stepping into a world that most of us can only imagine, a world where every movement, every glance, and even the smallest gesture could carry enormous weight. Picture yourself transported to the late 19th century, into the glittering halls and sprawling estates of America's newly wealthy elite. This is a society defined by subtle rules and hidden codes, where social grace was not just a matter of personal pride, it was a survival skill. In this world, the difference between being accepted and being quietly shunned could hinge on something as seemingly trivial as the angle of a curtsy, the correct fork to use, or the precise way you held a teacup. Tonight, we will explore this fascinating and often bewildering universe of etiquette, uncovering how these conventions shape not only behavior at the table but the very fabric of elite social life. Imagine for a moment stepping into a grand Manhattan mansion in 1895. You have just inherited a fortune, but along with the wealth comes the responsibility and the danger of navigating this highly codified social landscape. The moment you cross the threshold, you are no longer just yourself. You have become a participant in a carefully choreographed performance, one where every action is watched, measured, and interpreted by others who have spent their entire lives mastering these unspoken rules. A slight misstep, a poorly timed gesture, or even a misplaced expression could mark you as uncultured or naive, and in a world where reputation is everything, such a mark could linger for generations. The stakes feel enormous because, in many ways, they are. Etiquette here is not mere formality. It is a language of power, a silent but potent currency that governs interactions and communicates one's place within the hierarchy. The grand entry halls and drawing rooms of these estates were designed to impress, intimidate, and subtly instruct. Ceilings soared above your head, painted with scenes meant to evoke classical grandeur, while polished floors reflected your every step, reminding you that nothing here was accidental. Portraits of ancestors gazed silently from gilded frames, their expressions conveying judgment, expectation, and the weight of legacy. The furniture, carefully arranged and impossibly stiff, was less about comfort and more about the cultivation of posture, poise, and a sense of discipline. Walking into such a space was a reminder that appearances mattered above all else. Each room had a purpose, each chair a function beyond mere seating, and every object, whether a vase, a clock, or a silver platter, carried historical significance and demanded respect. The etiquette of this world began the moment you approached the table. Meals were no longer simple acts of nourishment. They were intricate performances requiring knowledge, precision, and an understanding of centuries of inherited tradition. Forks and knives were not interchangeable tools, they were instruments in a silent symphony. Misusing a utensil could signal ignorance or impatience, and the watchful eyes of both relatives and staff ensured that mistakes were never overlooked. Even something as small as reaching for the wrong fork could earn a glance that carried the weight of disapproval, a reminder that every detail of behavior was under scrutiny. The act of eating, which many of us take for granted as casual or comforting, became a rigorous test of discipline and social literacy. But etiquette was not just about objects and utensils, it was also about movement and presence. Posture was treated as a moral and social indicator. Sitting incorrectly, slouching, or allowing one's limbs to rest casually was interpreted as laziness, disrespect, or a lack of refinement. Children were trained from an early age to maintain impeccable posture, learning to glide across rooms, stand at attention, and hold their shoulders back as if every motion were a reflection of their family's honor. Adults, too, were constantly aware of the invisible audience that evaluated them, and the slightest lapse could prompt a correction from a matriarch or patriarch, often delivered in a subtle but unmistakable manner. This attention to posture and movement created a culture where discipline, composure, and restraint were not just encouraged, they were essential. Even conversation adhered to strict protocols. Topics were carefully curated to avoid offense or scandal, often revolving around neutral subjects such as the weather, polite inquiries about distant relatives, or the most recent travel plans. Emotional, controversial, or overly engaging topics were discouraged, as they risked disrupting the carefully maintained equilibrium of social interactions. Children spoke only when spoken to, and their words were expected to be formal, polite, and precise. The rhythm of speech, the timing of questions, and the subtle inflections in tone were all part of a larger code of conduct that reinforced hierarchy and demonstrated understanding of one's social position. Communication, like posture and table manners, became a refined art, a language in which subtlety and discretion were prized above all. The home itself functioned as an extension of this intricate social choreography. Each room was designed to convey both status and expectation. There were spaces for entertainment, for learning, and for quiet reflection, but also forbidden rooms, carefully preserved and off-limits to all but the most trusted family members. These rooms were not only physical spaces but symbols of restraint, discipline, and the untouchable authority of tradition. Crossing the threshold without permission invited disapproval that could ripple through the household, reinforcing lessons about boundaries, respect, and the importance of restraint. Even pets and staff were trained to respond to the unspoken rules of the house, creating an environment in which every presence, from the human to the inanimate, played a role in sustaining order and hierarchy. Wealth itself was communicated with equal subtlety. Unlike the overt displays often seen in popular media, elite Americans preferred to imply status rather than announce it. Luxury was woven into conversation and behavior, often delivered in whispered references to properties, private clubs, or travel experiences, leaving listeners to infer the magnitude of one's fortune. Even complaints about inconveniences such as the difficulty of landing a private plane or navigating a massive estate were crafted to subtly highlight privilege without appearing ostentatious. This careful dance of disclosure and implication required skill, intelligence, and an intuitive understanding of social cues. To the uninitiated, the wealth and power of this world might seem invisible, but to those who knew the codes, every gesture, every phrase, and every detail communicated volumes. Education in etiquette began at an early age. Children were taught to navigate this complex world through imitation, practice, and correction. They learned the correct way to walk, speak, eat, and present themselves, absorbing the lessons of prior generations. Mistakes were noted and gently corrected, often in ways that left a lasting impression. Through repetition, observation, and guidance, young members of elite families internalized a sophisticated set of social skills that allowed them to participate seamlessly in high society. These lessons extended beyond the dining table and into every aspect of life, from selecting clothing to interacting with guests, demonstrating that etiquette was as much a tool for survival as it was a reflection of refinement. The rules of elite etiquette were not arbitrary. They were deeply intertwined with power, identity, and the preservation of family legacy. Mastery of these codes ensured that one's social standing remained secure, while failure could invite subtle ostracism or long-lasting disapproval. In a society where reputation was currency, every act, no matter how small, carried significance. The careful choreography of posture, speech, attire, and table manners reflected not just personal refinement but also the collective values, traditions, and history of a family. Understanding these rules was both a privilege and a responsibility, a testament to the intricate social fabric that defined elite life. Stepping into this world, it becomes clear that etiquette was more than protocol. It was an expression of identity, a demonstration of control, and a lens through which wealth and power were both displayed and maintained. The seemingly trivial details, the precise use of a fork, the correct fold of a napkin, the angle of a curtsy, were imbued with meaning far beyond their immediate function. Every gesture communicated knowledge, status, and awareness of the invisible rules that governed behavior. In essence, etiquette became a performance in which the entire household participated, consciously or unconsciously, shaping the social landscape with every carefully measured move. So as we begin our exploration of this fascinating world, remember that what may appear excessive, rigid, or even whimsical to an outsider was, for members of these elite circles, a fundamental aspect of daily life. These codes of behavior were not mere rituals but instruments of social cohesion, refinement, and power. They reflected a worldview in which precision, discipline, and subtlety were paramount, and where the smallest lapse could ripple through generations. By understanding these conventions, we gain insight not only into the habits of the wealthy but also into the social structures, values, and priorities that shaped their lives. Tonight, we will continue to unravel these traditions, revealing the curious, sometimes absurd, yet endlessly fascinating rules that governed America's elite, where etiquette was nothing short of an art form, and every gesture counted. Breakfast in the homes of America's elite was far removed from the casual meals most of us take for granted. It was not merely the consumption of food, but an elaborate performance governed by ritual, precision, and unspoken rules. Each morning, before the first bite was taken, a silent choreography began. Chairs were arranged to exact specifications, each at a measured distance from the table, angled just so, ensuring that posture could be maintained while signaling authority, grace, or deference depending on one's place at the hierarchy. The dining room itself seemed designed to impress and intimidate simultaneously. Massive ceilings soared above, and the faint echo of footsteps reminded guests that the room was a stage upon which every gesture would be observed, judged, and remembered. Portraits of ancestors hung on the walls, their eyes silently assessing the newcomers and the young members of the household, ensuring that lessons of etiquette were enforced beyond spoken instruction. The table presented a landscape of gleaming silverware, crystal glasses, and polished porcelain so reflective it seemed almost like a mirror, reminding everyone of the careful attention required for every movement. Forks, knives, and spoons were arranged in strict order, a visual representation of the unspoken hierarchy. Each piece had a designated purpose, and reaching for the wrong one could elicit a silent, yet piercing, disapproval from the staff or relative. It was not only about knowing which utensil to use, but also about understanding timing, grip, and movement. The napkin, for instance, required an elegant fold and had to be placed just so on one's lap, symbolizing a mastery of subtlety, restraint, and awareness of both self and surroundings. Food itself was carefully curated and presented in ways that demanded refinement rather than satisfaction. Slices of melon were thin enough to see through, eggs were served in tiny cups that required delicate handling, and toast was placed upright in silver racks designed to maintain both dignity and a sense of challenge. Jam and condiments were administered with the gravity of a ceremonial act, often requiring the precise coordination of hand and utensil. Buttering a piece of bread was not simply spreading a pat. It was a measured gesture, conducted with a specific knife and applied in increments that reflected control, patience, and understanding of the unspoken code. Even a seemingly simple sip of coffee was laden with protocol, served by staff, accepted with the appropriate number of sugar cubes, and consumed with quiet, careful movements that conveyed calm, discipline, and poise. Conversation during breakfast was highly regulated. Only neutral, safe topics were acceptable, usually limited to weather, travel, or polite inquiries about the health of distant relatives. Anything too lively, emotional, or opinionated could disrupt the delicate balance of social order. Children, if present, spoke only when addressed, always beginning their sentences with a formal reference to mother or father, and even laughter was restrained, carefully moderated to avoid any sign of impropriety. Guests and family members alike navigated the table like actors in a carefully staged play, each aware of their cues, each movement deliberate, rehearsed, and measured. A tilt of the head, a pause in speech, or a misaligned utensil could communicate ignorance or lack of refinement, and the consequences, though subtle, were tangible. The act of eating itself was an exercise in discipline and self-control. Biting directly into bread was forbidden. Pieces had to be broken off individually. Chewing required a quiet, measured rhythm. Swallowing without sound, and wiping one's mouth had to conform to unspoken generational standards. When guests were present, these rituals intensified. One was expected to radiate effortless charm while masking even the smallest hint of hunger. Questions had to be framed politely, attention paid to social cues, and eyes kept from straying to the clock. Even when hunger was pressing, maintaining composure was paramount, as the act of dining was less about sustenance and more about demonstrating mastery over one's impulses. The meal unfolded as a series of intricate micro-performances, each carefully watched by those trained to notice imperfections. The butler hovered in the periphery, appearing only when necessary, observing with the calm, assured presence of someone accustomed to hundreds of such mornings. Any deviation, however small, risked a correction, a subtle glance, or a whispered admonition, all reinforcing the importance of training, discipline, and conformity. Children learned these lessons early, balancing books on their heads or walking in straight lines as practice for proper posture, and watching elders navigate the table with precision. Through repetition and observation, the household inculcated an instinctive understanding of these norms, shaping behavior with quiet authority and relentless consistency. Even the arrangement of utensils at the conclusion of the meal was laden with meaning. Simply leaving a fork or knife on the plate was not acceptable. Knives and forks had to be positioned in a precise arrangement, signaling to the staff, family, and even ancestors that the meal was complete and that the diner had conducted themselves appropriately. Crossing utensils, misaligning them, or signaling incorrectly could invite judgment, subtle reprimand, or even long-term embarrassment. Every action during breakfast, from the first sip of juice to the final fold of the napkin, was a public declaration of social awareness, self-control, and mastery of inherited conventions. The physical environment contributed to the intensity of the performance. Chairs were stiff, high-backed, and designed to encourage upright posture. Sitting required attention to the alignment of shoulders, knees, and ankles, with elbows carefully monitored to ensure they did not breach the invisible boundaries of decorum. Matriarchs and patriarchs wielded subtle power, enforcing posture through gestures, glances, or quiet corrections that left no doubt about expected standards. Even the placement of one's hands, the angle of the head, and the measured pacing of eating were part of this intricate dance, all designed to communicate refinement, respect, and awareness of hierarchy. The timing of service, too, was a matter of ritual. Courses arrived in carefully sequenced order, and each dish demanded its own set of responses and gestures. Soup had to be sipped in a precise manner, butter applied incrementally, and bread consumed with deliberate care. Conversation was punctuated by silences intended to maintain decorum, allowing the meal to proceed with a balance of attention to food and social observation. Even children were taught to respect this rhythm, understanding that breakfast was as much a lesson in social intelligence as it was nourishment. This meticulous approach to dining extended beyond the table to include all aspects of the household. The arrangement of rooms, placement of furniture, and maintenance of objects reinforced lessons in order, respect, and hierarchy. Every meal was a rehearsal for social life, an opportunity to demonstrate awareness, composure, and mastery of subtle signals. The ritual of breakfast cultivated skills that extended into conversation, business dealings, and social engagements, creating a generation trained in poise, observation, and discretion. The precision required might seem excessive to an outsider, yet for the members of these elite households, it was a form of survival, a way to assert belonging and protect reputation. Over time, children internalized these lessons, learning to navigate both overt and subtle forms of social instruction. They absorbed the patterns of speech, the timing of gestures, and the coded language of wealth and refinement. Mistakes were corrected quietly, ensuring that habits were formed without public humiliation but with a keen awareness of consequence. These lessons were cumulative, preparing the young for a life in which success depended not only on wealth or inheritance but on the ability to perform, consistently and convincingly, within the expectations of society. Breakfast, in this context, became a microcosm of elite life, a structured, highly controlled environment where skill, discipline, and awareness were constantly tested. The act of eating was transformed into an art, and the table itself became both a classroom and a stage. Each participant, from the youngest child to the oldest matriarch, contributed to the performance, consciously or not, and the consequences of error, though subtle, could resonate far beyond the meal itself. In this way, the rituals of breakfast instilled not only etiquette but a broader understanding of social navigation, teaching lessons about patience, observation, and the nuanced language of power. As the meal concluded, diners were expected to rise with measured grace, having demonstrated mastery over both appetite and behavior. Chairs were pushed back softly, utensils arranged correctly, and the final gestures of the meal communicated a quiet triumph over the challenges of discipline, observation, and subtlety. Breakfast, though fleeting in duration, encapsulated the values, priorities, and expectations of the household, reinforcing lessons about composure, elegance, and the unspoken hierarchy that governed every interaction. Through repetition, observation, and careful correction, these mornings created a rhythm and understanding that shaped not just meals but the very way individuals moved through society. The intense focus on presentation, control, and precision during breakfast also reflected broader values of legacy, wealth, and social cohesion. Every detail, from the correct placement of a fork to the careful management of conversation, reinforced a culture in which appearances and behavior were inseparable from status and reputation. Success at the table was a reflection of discipline, upbringing, and social intelligence, signaling to others that one was capable of navigating the complexities of elite life. In this way, the rituals of breakfast served as both training and performance, cultivating an understanding of etiquette that extended far beyond the dining room. Even today, examining these practices offers insight into the priorities, challenges, and expectations of elite society in historical contexts. It highlights the ways in which social rules can shape behavior, instill discipline, and communicate status without words. The rituals of breakfast, with their precision, observation, and hierarchy, reveal the subtleties of social interaction, illustrating how even the simplest daily act can carry layers of meaning, expectation, and consequence. The lessons learned around these tables were designed to last a lifetime, shaping the conduct, judgment, and awareness of all who participated. Navigating the table of America's elite required a knowledge of cutlery that bordered on mastery of an obscure, highly specialized language. Each utensil had a purpose, a history, and a hierarchy as rigid as it was invisible to the uninitiated. The dining table was a landscape of silver, crystal, and polished porcelain, and every element within it served both practical and symbolic functions. Forks were not interchangeable. Knives carried subtle messages about intent, and spoons demanded a grace of movement that few outside these circles could truly appreciate. From the moment one approached the table, the mind was occupied with counting tines, measuring handles, and recalling lessons from childhood about which implement belonged to which course. The basic rules start from the outside and work inward, with each course sounded simple, yet concealed 1,000 traps designed to expose ignorance, inexperience, or lack of attention to social cues. The fork closest to the plate was deceptively simple. It was not actually basic but fundamental to establishing a rhythm for the meal. Beyond it lay the salad fork, modest in stature but imbued with quiet authority. The fish fork, usually placed further to the left, awaited its rare occasion with patient expectation. Mistaking it for the dessert fork or any other utensil could instantly reveal a newcomer, earning glances from relatives who had perfected their own performances over decades. Knives carried their own silent rules. The dinner knife, positioned prominently beside the plate, symbolized readiness and precision, while the butter knife, diminutive but demanding respect, required exact handling. The fish knife, with its curved, almost unnatural shape, challenged the diner to wield it correctly or face the consequences of subtle social judgment. Spoons, too, presented their own set of rules. Soup spoons demanded round, careful motions. Dessert spoons, shallower and delicate, were intended for lighter fare. The teaspoon existed mostly as a prop, its presence a reminder of ceremonial correctness rather than practical utility. Placement was only part of the challenge. How one used utensils communicated everything from refinement to ignorance. Lifting a fork, knife, or spoon required controlled, deliberate motion. Each movement reflected awareness of social hierarchy, the expectations of observers, and the unspoken rules of the room. Reaching for a utensil at the wrong moment, using the incorrect technique, or handling an implement with too much force could be interpreted as a breach of decorum, instantly broadcasting one's inexperience or social misalignment. In this environment, the table became a battlefield of perception, a stage on which every gesture mattered, and a misstep could reverberate far beyond the meal itself. Soup service was a particularly delicate phase of this ritual. The diner had to identify the correct spoon, usually round and generous, and execute the proper scooping technique. One was expected to scoop away from the body, never toward it, a subtle test of control and awareness. Failure to comply, such as using the oval spoon reserved for other courses or scooping incorrectly, could invite the disapproving gaze of a distant aunt or the quiet but piercing scrutiny of the butler. Bread service, too, was fraught with peril. A tiny butter knife perched on a miniature bread plate required measured, incremental use. Bread had to be torn in precise pieces, buttered delicately, and transferred without touching the communal supply improperly. Crossing invisible boundaries, such as taking from a neighbor's plate, was a cardinal sin, resulting in quiet censure for days, weeks, or even years within family lore. Dessert introduced yet another layer of complexity. Miniature forks and spoons, almost dollhouse-sized, demanded a finesse few could maintain without intense concentration. Each dessert utensil had a specialized purpose, one fork for cake, another for fruit, a tiny spoon for mousses or puddings. The diner had to remain constantly aware of which implement to deploy at every moment, matching it perfectly to the dish at hand. Mistakes were not dramatic, but they carried lasting consequences, as family members recorded such errors with meticulous attention. Even the arrangement of utensils at the end of the meal was critical. Knives and forks had to be aligned at precise angles, signaling to both staff and household that the meal had been completed correctly. Crossing utensils unintentionally could constitute a declaration of rebellion, however subtle, and invite whispers long after the plates had been cleared. Children in these households were introduced to cutlery from a young age. Through repetition and observation, they learned to recognize each utensil, its intended use, and the sequence in which it should be employed. Practice meals, games, and drills reinforced the fine motor skills, awareness, and discipline necessary to navigate the table successfully. Even holding utensils required training. The fork needed a particular angle, the knife required controlled pressure, and the spoon demanded an elegant arc in motion. Misalignment, imbalance, or excess force could all be interpreted as indicators of improper upbringing or lack of social awareness. Beyond technical execution, cutlery was deeply symbolic. Selection and proper use communicated status, refinement, and membership in a social order that extended far beyond the immediate meal. Using the wrong implement could mark one as New money, inexperienced, or socially awkward. Conversely, mastery of the table's instruments demonstrated sophistication, confidence, and knowledge passed down through generations. The tools of the meal became instruments of both education and evaluation, shaping behavior, social understanding, and perception over the course of a single breakfast. Social observation intensified the challenge. Family members, distant relatives, and occasional guests were constantly watching, subtly signaling approval or disapproval through posture, glance, or expression. The stakes were never explicitly stated, yet everyone understood the consequences of error. Newcomers quickly learned that failing to perform the correct utensil choreography could result in diminished status, a shift in seating, or quiet exclusion from family events. Conversely, those who mastered the rituals earned practical benefits in dining comfort and intangible advantages in social capital, recognition, and respect. Staff played both supportive and supervisory roles. Butlers, maids, and servers appeared at critical moments, delivering utensils, pouring drinks, or adjusting placements, but always expecting diners to know the proper sequence and method. Any misstep could require intervention, which, while discreet, reinforced that every movement was evaluated. These interactions were subtle lessons, guiding participants toward mastery without overtly punishing failure, yet embedding respect for the rules of each meal. Etiquette surrounding cutlery extended beyond the table. Lessons included carrying utensils, using them while standing, and aligning them in ceremonial or social settings. These practices reinforced both technical skill and psychological awareness necessary for navigating elite social environments successfully. The careful orchestration of utensils created an environment of discipline, observation, and refinement permeating every aspect of life in these households. Every meal was an opportunity to demonstrate awareness, skill, and composure, training diners in both technical proficiency and social intelligence. The lessons learned at the table were cumulative, reinforcing patience, observation, subtlety, and self-control. Success with cutlery translated to broader social mastery, preparing participants to navigate conversations, negotiations, and interactions with a polished, disciplined presence. Even in error, the ritual was designed to teach rather than shame. Quiet corrections, subtle gestures, and careful guidance ensured that each diner internalized lessons without overt humiliation. Cutlery was not merely functional but a medium through which social hierarchy, tradition, and expectation were communicated. Mastery required physical skill, mental presence, focus, and awareness of both one's behavior and others' reactions. By the meal's end, a successful diner demonstrated attention to detail, mastery of subtle rules, and understanding of the interplay between individual action and social expectation. They participated in a centuries-old tradition, performing a ritual that reinforced family hierarchy and personal refinement. Mastery of cutlery became a symbol of broader competence, signaling readiness to operate within elite social spheres, conveying discipline and poise. Examining this complexity provides insight into the meticulous attention to detail defining these social environments. Small, mundane objects were elevated to instruments of education, performance, and evaluation. Every fork, knife, and spoon became a vehicle for refinement, a silent communicator of status, and a test of awareness and patience. Cutlery was never merely functional. It was a language, a code, and a test. The table became a classroom, a stage, and a proving ground, where mastery reflected social understanding. Success brought not only proper dining habits but credibility, respect, and subtle authority. The act of handling cutlery transcended nourishment, becoming a lifelong lesson in precision, observation, and the art of navigating complex social hierarchies. In the world of America's elite, posture was far more than a physical stance. It was a visible declaration of character, discipline, and inherited refinement. Every straightened back, every squared shoulder, Every deliberate gesture was a signal to observers that the individual had been trained, supervised, and molded to reflect the values of the household and the lineage it represented. Slouching, reclining, or even casual relaxation were interpreted not merely as lapses in physical grace but as evidence of moral and social weakness. From the moment one entered a room, the body was under scrutiny, a silent ledger upon which family members, staff, and guests recorded points for or against a person's social competence. Children learned early that posture was inseparable from etiquette. The slightest deviation could elicit a subtle correction, a pointed glance, or, in extreme cases, a whispered admonition that carried weight far beyond the immediate moment. The process began even before a person reached a chair. Walking through hallways, approaching furniture, or stepping into social spaces required a measured grace. Feet needed to touch the floor lightly, knees aligned, and steps timed to the rhythm of propriety. Stomping, rushing, or allowing the arms to swing unchecked was considered a breach of decorum. The anticipation of observation heightened awareness, turning every movement into a conscious performance. The act of sitting itself was highly codified. One could not simply collapse into a chair. The descent had to be smooth yet deliberate, hips aligned with the frame, knees at precise angles, and shoulders in exact correspondence with the chair's high back. Failure to adhere to these invisible standards invited immediate, silent correction. The matriarch or patriarch might raise an eyebrow, shift slightly in their seat, or emit a soft cough, each signal carrying the weight of authority accumulated over generations. The chair, far from a neutral object, was a tool designed to enforce uprightness. High-backed, often stiff, and crafted from materials that demanded alertness, each chair required attention to balance and alignment. Armrests were not merely functional but symbolic, dictating the appropriate placement of hands, forearms, and elbows. Any deviation such as allowing elbows to dangle, slumping, or leaning too far was a visual transgression, interpreted as laziness, indiscipline, or an imperceptible challenge to the hierarchy of the room. Children learned quickly that each seating arrangement was a test. A slight tilt of the head, a crossed leg in the wrong moment, or a hand resting incorrectly could mark them as careless or unrefined. The penalties, while often subtle, were permanent in their social memory. A misplaced elbow could shift a child's future place at family gatherings, subtly relegating them to a position of lesser influence or visibility. Meals became an arena in which posture and cutlery performance intersected. A perfectly straight back was not merely aesthetic. It facilitated proper use of utensils, controlled movement, and ensured that gestures were synchronized with social expectations. Each sip of coffee, each bite of fruit, and each small motion of lifting utensils or napkins was performed with a controlled elegance that depended entirely on disciplined alignment. Mistakes were magnified, and minor lapses became opportunities for silent evaluation. Children and newcomers watched and mirrored those with experience, internalizing gestures and postures with the precision of apprentices in a long-standing tradition. Over time, the body itself became a repository of etiquette, capable of performing hundreds of complex social functions without conscious thought. Posture drills were not limited to mealtimes. Walks through hallways, the act of entering and exiting rooms, and even casual interactions were infused with protocols designed to maintain composure. Family members were expected to glide rather than walk heavily, to pause respectfully when elders were nearby, and to maintain alignment even while engaged in conversation or observation. Failure to anticipate these subtleties could be noticed instantly. A matriarch's soft sigh, a patriarch's raised eyebrow, or the almost imperceptible shake of a hand could serve as reminders of the importance of uprightness. In this environment, physical discipline became inseparable from social understanding. To master posture was to master awareness, attention, and subtle communication. Children's training in posture began at an age when most would barely consider their bodies consciously. Exercises included balancing objects on heads while walking, maintaining alignment while standing for extended periods, and participating in games that tested endurance and precision. Even leisure activities were appropriated into the regimen. Bridge nights, charades, and social play were subtly repurposed to reinforce uprightness and control. Even pets were trained, in their own way, to mirror the disciplined environment, adding to the subtle social pressure in the household. This constant emphasis created a culture in which the body was a vessel of moral and social expectation, and every gesture, no matter how small, carried meaning. The symbolism of posture extended to legacy and social signaling. A straight back communicated discipline, the ability to endure discomfort, and the capacity to perform with refinement. It indicated that the individual had been raised correctly, understood rules, and could project both respectability and authority. Conversely, slouching or casual alignment suggested a lack of discipline, exposure to inferior upbringing, or a casual disregard for tradition. Posture became a visual shorthand for character, conveying messages that words alone could not. Each movement communicated knowledge of hierarchy, awareness of observers, and mastery of social codes. Observation of posture was a continuous process. From breakfast to dinner, from hallway to parlor, every movement was monitored, internalized, and assessed. The invisible scoring system rewarded precision, patience, and controlled expression while subtly punishing carelessness, haste, or inattentiveness. Those who mastered these rules were rewarded with both tangible and intangible privileges, seating at prominent tables, inclusion in social rituals, and acknowledgement of competence within the family hierarchy. Those who faltered received subtle signals of correction, a shifting chair, a slight sigh, or the redirection of attention, each reinforcing the connection between physical composure and social perception. Beyond social function, the emphasis on posture shaped personality and awareness. Children and adults learned to inhabit their bodies with attention, mindfulness, and intentionality. Every gesture became an opportunity to display awareness, control, and refinement. Posture was internalized as a constant guide, shaping not only physical movement but also mental discipline and social strategy. Over time, these habits created individuals capable of navigating complex social landscapes with subtlety and poise. The disciplined alignment of body and gesture reflected broader patterns of behavior, influencing conversation, negotiation, and personal presentation. Even informal moments carried significance. Sitting on a sofa, leaning against a wall, or even standing in conversation required adherence to these invisible codes. Slumping, fidgeting, or careless movement risked marking one as inexperienced, socially unrefined, or unobservant. The body became an instrument of communication, capable of conveying status, attention, and social intelligence without the need for words. Those who mastered these physical codes gained influence and credibility, while those who ignored or violated them risked marginalization, subtle exclusion, or long-term social consequences. The rigor of this system extended into public appearances, where the principles of posture and presentation combined with fashion, etiquette, and wealth signaling. Standing straight, walking gracefully, and maintaining poise in conversation became markers of competence and breeding. The body was expected to communicate refinement as consistently as clothing, tone, and conversation. Each action, whether in private or public, contributed to a cumulative impression that would be remembered, scrutinized, and referenced in future social interactions. In elite households, posture was inseparable from identity. It reflected upbringing, awareness, and capacity for social navigation. Correct posture signaled adherence to tradition, respect for hierarchy, and alignment with cultural expectations. Slouching, casual movement, or careless alignment suggested deviation, inadequacy, or ignorance. Thus, the act of sitting, standing, or walking became a continuous demonstration of skill, patience, and comprehension of the unspoken rules that governed every aspect of life in these circles. Meals, games, walks, and casual interactions all became arenas in which posture demonstrated competence. Observers, trained over years to detect subtle deviations, assessed every movement, granting privileges, acknowledgement, or quiet censure based on performance. Children, apprentices, and newcomers learned through observation, practice, and correction that mastery of the body was inseparable from mastery of the social world. Over time, these lessons produced individuals capable of moving through elite environments with both precision and authority, using posture not merely as a physical skill but as a tool of social power. The importance of posture extended beyond practicality. It served as a visual metaphor for discipline, refinement, and the capacity to endure minor discomforts for the sake of social performance. Straight backs and measured movements communicated stability, reliability, and competence, signaling to family members, peers, and guests that one was capable of upholding tradition, navigating hierarchy, and performing with grace under observation. In essence, posture became a moral and social compass, guiding behavior and shaping perception in ways that words alone could not achieve. By the end of any given day, the repetition of these practices, whether during meals, walks, or formal events, instilled a profound awareness of the body and its role in social signaling. The elite household transformed ordinary physical acts into exercises in discipline, observation, and refinement. Each posture, each gesture, each carefully measured movement was a statement, a lesson, and a performance, reinforcing both individual and collective identity within the rigid social structures of wealth and tradition. Through careful guidance, silent observation, and deliberate repetition, posture became more than a habit. It became a measure of one's suitability, training, and understanding of the complex codes governing elite life. A straight back was a symbol of respect for ancestors, attention to detail, and mastery of social nuance. A slouch was more than a lapse in comfort. It was a visible declaration of inexperience, distraction, or subtle rebellion. In this way, the physical body became inseparable from social identity, a canvas upon which refinement, competence, and status were displayed with every movement. The elite's obsession with posture demonstrates the intricate interplay between social expectation, discipline, and perception. Each member of a household became a performer, trained to inhabit their body in ways that communicated status, competence, and respectability. From childhood through adulthood, the lessons reinforced awareness, precision, and self-control. Physical alignment became a lifelong skill, deeply intertwined with social mastery, etiquette, and the subtle demonstration of wealth and heritage. In these circles, posture was not just an act. It was a language, a tool, and a moral statement, shaping behavior, observation, and social interaction across generations. In the sprawling estates of America's elite, there existed spaces that were almost mythical in their significance, rooms that carried with them a weight of history, expectation, and unspoken rules so rigid they could silence even the boldest visitor. Among these, the Forbidden Room held a particular fascination, a mixture of awe, terror, and rigid ritual that distinguished it from any other chamber in the house. Unlike the library or dining room, which were designed for function or display, the Forbidden Room was a monument to restraint, pride, and social theater. It was rarely entered, often roped off, and even the act of gazing toward it carried a level of tension and consequence that few could articulate but all felt. The very name forbidden conveyed the gravity of trespass. To step inside without explicit permission was considered an affront not only to the household but to the lineage itself, as if the act could ripple backward and disturb ancestors who had long since passed yet remained present in spirit. From the moment one crossed the threshold of the main floor, the Forbidden Room made itself known. Its door, often ajar just slightly, offered a sliver of glimpse into a space suffused with sunlight filtered through lace curtains. The light illuminated collections of crystal, porcelain, and heirloom furniture that seemed suspended between past and present, delicate and impervious at once. Each item was carefully arranged, its position dictated by generations of tacit consensus and historical precedent. No one outside the family ever knew the rules fully. Even those raised within its walls could feel the tension of expectation, a sense that every movement, glance, or sound was under scrutiny. The carpet, plush and unyielding, muted footsteps and signaled the sanctity of the environment. The furniture, often encased in protective coverings, seemed to vibrate with unspoken admonitions, warning of the consequences of careless interaction. Even breathing was moderated, for the room demanded reverence. Children were educated early on in the protocols surrounding the forbidden room, taught as though they were attending a diplomatic summit. Hands in pockets, eyes straight ahead, and shoes removed if necessary, they were briefed on the consequences of minor errors, which could be whispered warnings or subtle glances from authority figures. Tales of past transgressions were recounted with hushed reverence, highlighting cousins who had dared sit on a forbidden settee or neighbors' children who had spilled a drop of grape juice on the heirloom rug. These stories became part of the household mythology, creating a culture in which the forbidden room existed simultaneously as a shrine and a warning. Its aura influenced the behavior of everyone in the house, instilling respect, anxiety, and curiosity in equal measure. The forbidden room's objects were as much a part of the ritual as the space itself. Crystal vases, fragile figurines, and commemorative plates from distant weddings were displayed like museum artifacts, each with a history that lent it weight and significance. One never touched these objects. Even the faintest interaction without permission could provoke a silent but severe social censure. The furniture was stiff, imposing, and beautiful, designed to inspire awe while subtly reminding visitors that they were not meant to relax or claim ownership of comfort. Chairs, sofas, and settees were arranged with meticulous precision, often in geometries that were difficult to navigate gracefully, requiring careful consideration for every movement, whether stepping between them or observing their placement from a respectful distance. The room's mystique was amplified by its inaccessibility. Unlike spaces designed for daily life or formal gatherings, the forbidden room was rarely used. Special occasions, such as Thanksgiving, Christmas, or significant family celebrations, might grant temporary access, but always under strict supervision and with behavior closely monitored. On these days, the household would adopt the most deliberate movements, tiptoeing across the carpet, speaking in hushed tones, and approaching furniture with reverence. The air itself seemed charged, carrying the faint scent of lemon polish, old wood, and, occasionally, mothballs that hinted at centuries of preservation. Every visitor and family member was acutely aware that a single misstep, resting a hand in the wrong place, misaligning a foot, or making an unseemly sound could transform a moment of admiration into a minor catastrophe in the eyes of tradition. Even animals, especially family pets accustomed to the household's rigid standards, were trained to respect the invisible boundaries of the room. A dog, otherwise fearless and energetic, would hesitate at the threshold, sensing the weight of expectation and silently communicating the consequences of encroachment. Children, adults, and even staff navigated this room as if performing a carefully rehearsed ballet, each step and gesture conveying awareness, respect, and mastery of the unspoken code. The room operated almost as a social litmus test, a place where training, observation, and inherited discipline were displayed in a condensed, tangible form. The rituals surrounding the forbidden room extended beyond mere entry. Every glance, every interaction with the objects, and every step taken within its confines was an exercise in control and perception. Furniture might be admired from a distance, its angles and proportions noted silently. Plates and vases were acknowledged with careful eye contact but never touched. Carpets were traversed with measured steps, as though each footfall contributed to a ritual dance whose choreography had been passed down for generations. The space was simultaneously educational, performative, and intimidating, teaching respect for history, awareness of social hierarchies, and the subtleties of inherited etiquette. Visitors learned quickly that the room's aura demanded a combination of restraint, observation, and humility. One could admire without interacting, recognize beauty without altering, and participate without disrupting. The Forbidden Room's design reinforced these lessons. Every object, angle, and space seemed calibrated to instill a sense of awe and self-consciousness. Even standing too close to a chair or allowing the shadow of one's body to fall on a porcelain figurine could generate subtle corrective signals: a clearing of the throat, a gentle cough, or a small sigh from an elder observing the ritual. Through repetition and careful observation, the room taught awareness of one's body, gestures, and even thoughts in ways that no spoken instruction could. The psychological impact of the Forbidden Room extended well beyond its walls. Children and adults carried the lessons learned within into every other space of the household. Awareness, caution, and deliberate movement became second nature, influencing posture, walking, and interaction in rooms designed for more casual activity. The room's lessons in respect, patience, and control permeated daily life, reinforcing the broader patterns of elite social behavior. Even casual spaces were approached with an unconscious attention to posture, gesture, and timing, a legacy of the training instilled by the Forbidden Room's silent authority. Over time, the Forbidden Room became both a symbol and a tool. It symbolized the household's history, prestige, and adherence to tradition. It functioned as a tool of socialization, instilling discipline, observation, and self-control in every generation. Its existence reinforced the hierarchy of the home, demonstrating that not all spaces were equal and that privilege came with responsibility, restraint, and reverence. It was a living lesson in control, subtlety, and performance, shaping those who entered in ways both visible and invisible. Even the act of leaving the Forbidden Room carried significance. Exiting required the same measured attention as entering, stepping backward to avoid turning one's back too abruptly, aligning the body with furniture and architecture, and retreating without disturbing the environment. Each step was an opportunity to reinforce the lessons learned: awareness of space, respect for objects, and understanding of one's place within the household's social hierarchy. The return to ordinary rooms was marked by subtle shifts in movement and posture, carrying with them a lingering consciousness of the discipline and history embodied by the Forbidden Room. In essence, the Forbidden Room was more than a physical space. It was a moral, social, and psychological instrument. It trained the body and mind to operate within the boundaries of propriety, instilled an acute awareness of the consequences of every action, and created a shared understanding of history, hierarchy, and privilege. It demanded attention, respect, and subtlety, teaching lessons that extended far beyond the walls themselves. Children who mastered the rituals of the room grew into adults who navigated the broader world of elite social circles with precision, poise, and an unspoken understanding of hierarchy. The room's aura persisted even when unoccupied. Its presence shaped the atmosphere of the entire household, influencing movement, conversation, and behavior across the estate. Family members internalized its lessons, moving through ordinary rooms with an awareness of the standards it embodied. Guests, staff, and children all carried the knowledge that certain spaces required a heightened level of attentiveness, respect for history and tradition, and an understanding of the silent codes that governed elite life. Even the anticipation of entering the Forbidden Room imparted the same lessons: caution, reverence, and awareness of one's body and surroundings. Through this combination of restriction, observation, and ritual, the Forbidden Room became a defining element of elite households. It was a space of education, tradition, and social enforcement, shaping behavior and awareness in ways that extended far beyond its physical confines. Its influence was subtle but profound, reinforcing hierarchy, discipline, and the meticulous attention to detail that characterized elite life. The lessons of the Forbidden Room persisted long after individuals left its threshold, shaping posture, etiquette, and awareness in ways that were visible, tangible, and enduring. By the time one had left the Forbidden Room and returned to more ordinary spaces, the impact of its discipline and ritual was fully internalized. Movements became measured, gestures controlled, and posture precise. Conversations were approached with awareness, and every action carried the weight of the lessons learned. The Forbidden Room had trained not only the body but the mind, embedding in every visitor a sense of respect, caution, and social intelligence. In this way, the room transcended its material presence, becoming both a symbol and a mechanism of elite cultural continuity, shaping generations with subtlety, authority, and enduring influence. In the rarefied circles of America's elite, wealth was never announced with fanfare, neon signs, or boastful declarations. Instead, it existed as a delicate undercurrent, a whisper threaded through conversation, clothing, and daily life. The truly wealthy had mastered an art of subtlety, an intricate ballet of implication and suggestion, in which a hint of affluence could speak louder than any shouted claim. It was not enough to simply possess vast estates, yachts, or collections of art. One had to convey it in a manner so refined that the observer could sense it without being explicitly told. In these circles, the casual mention of a summering out west implied a mountain lodge owned by the family for generations, while a throwaway reference to picking up something German for the garage might quietly signal the acquisition of a rare luxury vehicle. The uninitiated might miss it entirely, while those accustomed to the language of quiet privilege would hear and understand every subtle inflection. This form of social communication required training from a young age. Children of affluent families learned early that to state wealth plainly was not only gauche but socially lethal. They were taught to speak in insinuation, to couch success in understatement, and to weave modest complaints around their privileges to create an illusion of hardship. A 6-year-old might lament to a family friend, "Nana's tennis court is so far I can barely find it," which in reality communicated a sprawling estate and endless leisure opportunities. Parents and grandparents guided these lessons carefully, correcting a direct reference to a mansion or a private yacht with the same precision used to teach silverware etiquette. The child quickly learned that even in a family where abundance was abundant, one's words had to be measured, coded, and polished, as if each utterance were a carefully cut gem meant to reflect status without flashing its brilliance too openly. In adult company, the art became even more sophisticated. Conversations about travel, property, and leisure were embedded with nuanced markers of privilege. Someone might remark, almost apologetically, that the private beach was a bit rocky this year, signaling an estate where the sand is groomed and the drinks chilled by a retinue of attentive staff. Complaints were subtle and stylized, framed as minor inconveniences rather than privileges, yet the listener quickly deciphered the message. Wealth, power, and influence were omnipresent, omniscient, and effortlessly managed. Even small errors in this linguistic ballet, stating a precise figure, naming a designer, or describing a purchase too explicitly, could instantly mark the speaker as uncultured or unaware of the delicate codes governing elite conversation. A grandmother clearing her throat, a matriarch's faint disapproving glance, or a butler's imperceptible tisk served as instant social correction, enforcing the rules silently but unmistakably. Part of this subtlety lay in timing and restraint. The wealthy did not flaunt everything they owned at once. They hinted, allowed glimpses, and let imagination fill in the rest. A casual reference to flying commercial since the jet was being serviced communicated a private aircraft, while a quiet mention of the lodge is so peaceful after the holidays signaled multiple estates, staff, and the luxury of seasonal migration. The language of the elite was a coded economy, each word and phrase carefully calibrated to imply abundance without measuring it, to suggest scale without enumerating it, and to convey taste without advertising expenditure. Anyone who spoke in terms too concrete: dollars, square footage, or specific acquisitions risked social exile, a temporary but potent reminder that in these circles, knowledge was power, and subtlety was a form of control. Charity functions were another stage for the performance of subtle wealth. Donations, volunteer hours, and philanthropic activities were discussed in hushed tones, accompanied by clothing that implied refinement without ostentation. A murmured comment about the season's foundation work suggested engagement, commitment, and influence, while avoiding any overt bragging about monetary contributions. Mistakes or exaggerations became elegant vehicles for humble brags. The swimming pool might be a bit too long for water polo yet perfect for morning laps, or the vacation home terribly inconvenient due to a grass landing strip, yet precisely maintained for ideal leisure. These subtle narratives communicated a world in which privilege was ever present but never vulgar, a lifestyle so deeply ingrained that even complaints were elevated to performance art. Children of these families absorbed this linguistic dexterity from infancy. They were taught never to boast outright, but to layer their statements with implication, understatement, and storytelling so precise that the audience could decode the scale of privilege without explicit instruction. Saying, "Nana's house is so large I get lost walking to the tennis court," replaced a direct statement of ownership, training children to wield language with elegance and subtlety. By adulthood, these skills were honed to perfection, creating adults who could navigate conversations about wealth, property, travel, and leisure with the precision of a practiced social strategist. Every utterance was a calculated gesture, every sigh a nuanced signal, every complaint a performance of effortless affluence. The visual component of this subtlety was equally important. Clothing, accessories, and personal presentation communicated wealth and taste without shouting it. Fashion choices were dictated not by trends alone but by social survival. Every outfit had to align with the time of day, season, activity, and mood of the closest matriarch. A single color misstep, an inappropriate fabric, or poorly chosen accessory could generate subtle but potent social penalties: a raised eyebrow, a whispered correction, or a diminished standing in the silent hierarchy of observation. Wardrobes were extensive, with multiple changes throughout the day for various activities, each outfit carefully curated to signal status while remaining unobtrusive. Gloves, scarves, and hats were not merely functional but communicative, sending coded signals to those in the know about alliances, taste, and familial hierarchy. Even the act of traveling between seasonal homes became an orchestrated display of subtle wealth. Memorial Day signaled the start of summer migrations, requiring precise coordination of wardrobes, pets, trunks, and staff. Valets and maids packed clothing, prepared preserves, and ensured that every detail of the journey upheld the standards of taste and refinement. Arrival at a summer estate was ceremonial. A caretaker would have aired out rooms for weeks, dusted ancestral silver, and ensured that furniture, often unyielding and centuries old, was ready for inspection. Visitors moved with care through these spaces, conscious of every step, gesture, and expression. Even small children absorbed the choreography of arrival, learning that the journey itself communicated as much about status and taste as the destination. Luxury was communicated in gestures, objects, and tone rather than quantity. A whispered comment about a minor inconvenience carried more weight than a shouted description of opulence. Even mundane details like a slightly overgrown hedge or the difficulty of landing a private plane on a grass strip were reframed as tests of patience and character, subtly signaling privilege. The wealthy demonstrated restraint, cultivating an aura of effortlessness, as if the grandeur around them was natural and unremarkable. This cultivated nonchalance was the ultimate flex, The ability to own and manage vast resources while appearing unaffected, casual, and unassuming. The consequences of failing in this delicate social dance were immediate and potent. Those who spoke too directly about their possessions, displayed overt enthusiasm, or mismanaged the art of subtle bragging were often met with silence, disapproval, or correction. The reactions were understated but devastating: a grandmother's clearing of the throat, a matriarch's measured glance, or a carefully timed interruption could communicate a failure to comprehend the codes of elite society. These social cues reinforced the importance of subtlety and the meticulous management of self-presentation, ensuring that every generation understood the stakes of conversation, movement, and observation. Through these carefully orchestrated interactions, wealth became not just a measure of money but a measure of social intelligence, discipline, and refinement. The elite cultivated an environment in which the unspoken rules of speech, gesture, and posture governed behavior as much as the material possessions themselves. Every meal, every gathering, and every migration between homes became an opportunity to practice, refine, and display mastery of this delicate art. Children were trained in the codes from birth, and adults continued to practice with the precision of a musician perfecting a complex score. In these circles, subtlety was power, understatement was prestige, and the gentle, almost imperceptible flex of wealth was the ultimate demonstration of control, taste, and authority. Even in casual conversation, the principle of subtle flex remained paramount. A discussion of a recent vacation, property acquisition, or charitable endeavor required careful calibration. The goal was always to imply scale, taste, and refinement without crossing the boundary into vulgarity. The wealthy achieved this through language, body language, and timing, crafting statements that seemed offhand yet communicated volumes to the observant listener. A sigh, a carefully chosen adjective, or a fleeting pause could convey more information about wealth and status than pages of explicit description. Those who mastered this art were revered, those who misstepped were gently corrected, and those unaware were left to navigate the invisible, intricate landscape of social codes with uncertainty and anxiety. In the end, the subtle flex of wealth was as much about education and tradition as it was about display. It taught restraint, observation, and an acute awareness of others, embedding lessons of privilege, taste, and hierarchy in every gesture, word, and movement. This unspoken language of the elite, perfected over generations, ensured that wealth was both omnipresent and unobtrusive, powerful yet invisible, and always communicated with the gentlest possible touch. It was a skill learned early, refined throughout life, and mastered only through careful observation, practice, and an unerring sense of social grace. Those who understood it moved through the world effortlessly, hinting at abundance without flaunting it, commanding attention with understatement, and conveying power through the quietest of whispers. In America's elite circles, posture was never merely a matter of comfort or habit. It was a language, a measure of character, and a visible testament to one's upbringing. A straight back and poised shoulders were the silent signals of discipline, refinement, and inherited status. From the moment a child could walk upright, lessons in posture began not as casual guidance, but as a rigorous education, where each gesture and angle of the body conveyed social competence or, conversely, social inadequacy. Sitting, standing, and even moving through a room became a performance, a demonstration of the self-restraint and awareness required to exist comfortably among the socially powerful. The training was subtle but relentless. Children learned to approach furniture slowly, almost ceremoniously, waiting for elders to settle before even brushing the edge of a chair with their fingers. Walking across a room was an exercise in control, feet glided instead of stomping, steps measured, pauses perfectly timed, and head held with a precise alignment that suggested both confidence and humility. A misstep, a hurried movement, a misplaced weight, a slouch was met with correction, sometimes overt, often subtle, a matriarch's raised eyebrow. a patriarch's disapproving hum, or the barely perceptible tightening of a smile that communicated volumes. By adolescence, the child internalized these lessons, moving through hallways, parlors, and dining rooms as if under constant, invisible observation, aware that even the slightest lapse could signal inattention, laziness, or a lack of social education. Seating was a ritual in itself. A chair was not a piece of furniture but a carefully calculated tool for control. High-backed and often deliberately stiff, chairs enforced upright posture, ensuring that the sitter's spine remained aligned, shoulders squared, and hands positioned correctly. Armrests were rarely for comfort. Hands were expected to rest gently in laps or on the edges of tables, never dangling casually. Legs were crossed in a precise manner, knees aligned at 90 degrees, and feet placed deliberately, conveying calm control. Failure to meet these invisible standards risked the dreaded correction, a gentle but authoritative interruption reminding the sitter of their social responsibility. Even meals became exercises in posture. From the moment one was seated at a dining table, the body was engaged in a dance of discipline. Elbows had strict rules. Before dessert, they must never touch the table. Hands had to remain poised above plates or resting lightly in laps. Slouching was not merely untidy but an act of social rebellion, a visible breach of the unwritten contract of refinement. Across the table, elders and peers observed with calculated subtlety their reactions and eye roll, a quiet cough, a small sigh serving as both warning and instruction. Children watched closely, internalizing the lessons through observation and practice, and even pets in the household learned to mirror this disciplined comportment, sitting with dignity that matched their human companions. Posture was reinforced through exercises disguised as games. Charades, bridge, and even seemingly casual family gatherings were opportunities to practice alignment and poise. Children were trained to balance books on their heads, to walk the length of drawing rooms without faltering, and to remain still for long intervals, often under the scrutiny of a relative adorned with a brooch or a pearl necklace. The rewards for precision were subtle yet deeply felt: approval from the matriarch, a slight nod, a quiet smile, or an acknowledgement of potential inheritance. Mistakes were equally instructive. A minor slouch or uncontrolled gesture could result in a visible demotion at the next family gathering. A reminder that posture was not just an aesthetic concern but a reflection of social competence and family standing. Even ordinary moments carried weight. Reading in the library, standing for a photograph, or watching television in a permitted room required controlled body alignment. Sofas were deliberately firm to encourage straight backs. Cushions and upholstery offered minimal comfort, ensuring that even leisure activities reinforced the discipline of posture. In these households, every movement was imbued with significance. Sitting incorrectly was akin to mispronouncing an ancestral name. Standing too casually implied disrespect. Walking without deliberation suggested impulsiveness or lack of refinement. The body, in this environment, was a living testament to training, discipline, and the tacit knowledge of centuries of social expectation. Education in posture extended to social interactions beyond the family home. Visiting other estates, attending private schools, or entering elite clubs required the same awareness and control. The posture of arrival, the angle of handshake, the manner of standing while conversing, and the alignment of hands and feet were scrutinized by those who understood the invisible hierarchy of behavior. A newcomer unaware of these norms could be quickly identified, their youth, lack of training, or unfamiliarity betrayed by a single misaligned shoulder or unsteady step. Conversely, mastery of posture signaled readiness to participate fully in elite society, a mark of social competence that rivaled wealth or lineage in importance. The connection between posture and legacy was deeply ingrained. Uprightness was more than a physical quality. It was symbolic of moral fiber, self-discipline, and respect for tradition. A straight back was read as a visible representation of controlled desires, tempered instincts, and inherited refinement. The body itself became an instrument of social education, training generations to communicate wealth, taste, and authority without speaking. Just as manners, cutlery knowledge, and clothing conveyed sophistication, posture signaled that one could endure discomfort, maintain decorum, and embody the values deemed essential by previous generations. Even casual observations were part of this continuum of learning. At a family breakfast, the slight bend of a knee, the angle of a wrist, or the tilt of a head could spark commentary, often indirect, teaching attentiveness and subtlety. These lessons extended beyond humans. Family pets were expected to mirror dignity, sitting or lying in positions that reinforced household decorum. By embedding posture as a constant concern, the elite ensured that the household functioned as a living classroom, where every movement was both lesson and performance. The stakes were high. A poorly held posture at an important gathering could ripple through the family's social network, affecting invitations, seating arrangements, and even potential inheritances. Elders and peers maintained a careful watch, subtly correcting infractions with gestures, expressions, or quiet remarks. Children learned to anticipate these corrections, adjusting their stance, walk, and seating before a word was spoken. Through years of repetition, these behaviors became ingrained, producing adults who moved with deliberate grace, carrying themselves with the natural ease of someone who had internalized centuries of expectation. In elite social settings, even brief lapses were instructive. A momentary slump, a hastily lifted hand, or a misaligned shoulder became opportunities for correction and reflection, reinforcing lessons that would endure throughout life. The practice of uprightness trained patience, observation, and mindfulness, teaching that every action, no matter how small, conveyed meaning. Through this lens, posture became an emblem of preparedness, respect, and social intelligence, a silent yet powerful language understood by those initiated into the codes of elite society. Ultimately, posture as legacy was both performance and inheritance. It communicated that the individual had been trained, observed, and shaped by generations of ancestors who valued precision, elegance, and discipline. Sitting, standing, and moving through space became an art form, a silent testament to family values, wealth, and social acumen. In this world, the spine was not just a column of bone and muscle. It was a narrative device telling a story of upbringing, refinement, and the ability to navigate the complex, often invisible hierarchies of elite society. Those who mastered posture demonstrated their readiness to participate fully in this world, signaling understanding, discipline, and respect with every carefully measured gesture. And so, in the grand estates of old money, amidst ornate dining rooms, drawing rooms, and libraries, the act of sitting upright, walking with grace, or holding one's head just so was never trivial. It was a declaration of identity, a reflection of heritage, and a tangible link to a lineage that valued elegance, precision, and discipline above all else. Posture was the language of social survival, the visible marker of cultivation, and the enduring symbol of legacy. Every measured step, every aligned shoulder, every poised hand spoke of a life lived under scrutiny, instruction, and the silent, unyielding gaze of generations past. In this world, to sit, to stand, or to walk was to communicate wealth, knowledge, and refinement without uttering a single word. The lessons were learned early, practiced daily, and perfected over a lifetime, producing individuals whose very bodies testified to their education, upbringing, and understanding of the intricate, invisible codes that governed elite society. Posture was not merely a habit. It was inheritance, performance, and proof of belonging, a living, breathing marker of the privilege and discipline that defined America's upper echelons. The forbidden room in an elite American household was not merely a physical space. It was a symbol, a shrine, and a repository of power, discipline, and generational authority. Unlike other rooms where daily routines unfolded, the Forbidden Room existed outside ordinary life, untouched and inviolable except on the most carefully orchestrated occasions. It was a place everyone knew about, yet few entered, a silent arbiter of decorum that demanded both respect and restraint. The very knowledge of its existence shaped behavior throughout the household, influencing the way family members moved, spoke, and carried themselves. From the youngest child to the oldest relative, all were acutely aware of its unspoken rules. Approaching the Forbidden Room was a psychological exercise in restraint. The door itself often loomed slightly ajar, a subtle tease revealing just a sliver of patterned carpet, delicate lace curtains, or the gleam of polished wood. It was intentionally inviting yet simultaneously intimidating, a space that whispered of elegance, danger, and history. Anyone tempted to cross its threshold had to weigh curiosity against consequence, understanding that even the faintest misstep could provoke censure from an unseen, omnipresent authority. The room radiated significance. Every piece of furniture, every object, every carefully placed decorative element was a testament to lineage, taste, and the unyielding standards of a family that had survived for generations on wealth and discretion. Inside, the Forbidden Room was a museum of household artifacts and collectibles. Crystal vases, heirloom tea sets, intricately carved cabinets, and glass paperweights were arranged with meticulous precision. Each item seemed to carry the weight of history, a silent witness to family triumphs, scandals, and alliances. The furniture was rarely comfortable, intentionally rigid to maintain an aura of solemnity and dignity. Carpets were thick and plush, absorbing footsteps and muffling sounds, creating an almost sacred hush. The air itself seemed charged with the presence of ancestors, as if each breath taken in that room was monitored, evaluated, and quietly judged. Touching anything even inadvertently was tantamount to sacrilege. Children learned early to revere the Forbidden Room. They were briefed on its rules with the seriousness of diplomatic envoys preparing for treaty negotiations. Hands had to remain in pockets or at precise angles. Shoes were removed or quietly patted. Eyes were instructed to travel in deliberate paths, avoiding any accidental confrontation with an artifact or heirloom. Parents would explain in hushed tones the cautionary tales of those who had disobeyed, a cousin who had rested on a forbidden settee, a visiting child who spilled juice on a priceless rug, or even a servant who dared to rearrange a cushion. These stories, repeated with solemnity and a hint of fear, underscored the unassailable authority of the room and cemented its psychological weight. Entry into the Forbidden Room was reserved for special occasions. Holidays such as Thanksgiving and Christmas, or momentous family celebrations like weddings and funerals, could grant temporary access. But even then, the ritual of entry was precise and deliberate. Voices dropped to reverent whispers, footsteps became careful and measured, and the atmosphere thickened with unspoken anticipation. Adults and children alike were acutely aware that their presence was a privilege, and that any lapse in decorum could echo through family memory for years. The room's objects, the porcelain figurines, embroidered chairs, and intricately set tea trays, served not merely as decoration but as instruments of social education, teaching restraint, observation, and reverence. The furniture itself demanded obedience. Sofas were deliberately firm, chairs unusually upright, and tables placed to enforce both posture and proximity. Objects were carefully positioned, sometimes encased in protective coverings, signaling their fragility and importance. Even the slightest disruption, a misaligned pillow, a crooked doily, or a hastily placed teacup, was a breach of etiquette, a visible error that could provoke silent reproach. The room's power was as much symbolic as practical. It reminded occupants of the value of discipline, the weight of tradition, and the importance of maintaining appearances even in the smallest details. Throughout the day, the Forbidden Room exerted influence beyond its walls. Family members behaved differently in hallways, dining rooms, and drawing rooms because the forbidden room existed. Its presence created a culture of attentiveness, a constant awareness of consequence. Children learned to internalize restraint, practicing careful steps, measured gestures, and mindful speech in anticipation of the room's influence. Even casual movements around the house were filtered through the mental lens of the forbidden room's expectations. One did not sit carelessly, lean improperly, or handle objects without deliberate thought. The room's authority extended invisibly, shaping behavior throughout the household, and instilling a lasting understanding of hierarchy, discipline, and social intelligence. Pets, too, were not exempt. Household dogs and cats learned to avoid the threshold, pausing at invisible lines as if understanding the weight of what lay beyond. Their behavior mirrored the strictures placed upon human family members, a testament to the pervasive culture of reverence and control. The room's influence permeated daily life, conditioning all who dwelled in or visited the home to internalize the principles of respect, observation, and self-restraint. The forbidden room was thus a masterclass in behavioral conditioning, a silent instructor teaching lessons through expectation, proximity, and consequence rather than direct instruction. The room was also a tool of legacy. Objects within were often irreplaceable family heirlooms, each with a story, a memory, or a connection to ancestors long gone. By enforcing reverence, the family ensured that these pieces and the histories they represented remained unaltered, protected, and appreciated. Access to the room was a privilege that conveyed trust, status, and a tacit acknowledgement of social readiness. To be allowed inside, even briefly, was to be recognized as someone capable of respecting both material and symbolic heritage. Those denied entry were reminded of the weight of tradition and the importance of earning social trust through demonstrated comportment. There was also a performative element to the forbidden room. Guests who were permitted entry were expected to display restraint, poise, and appreciation, quietly acknowledging the unspoken hierarchy and cultural literacy of the household. Each movement, glance, and gesture was observed, consciously or subconsciously, reinforcing the implicit rules that governed behavior in elite circles. The room became a stage for the subtle demonstration of social skills, a place where understanding of etiquette, lineage, and propriety was both tested and displayed. It was a silent arena in which knowledge of ritual and expectation was as important as inherited wealth. Occasionally, the forbidden room was the setting for lessons in discretion and subtlety. Children observed adults handling delicate objects, noting how to move, speak, and breathe in proximity to valuable possessions. They watched as elders performed rituals around tea service, adjusted the placement of porcelain figurines, or opened and closed cabinets with calculated care. These lessons taught more than the proper way to behave. They instilled a philosophy of mindfulness, attentiveness, and respect for the unseen and unspoken rules that governed life in elite society. Through repetition and observation, children absorbed an understanding that the significance of behavior extended far beyond immediate consequence. It was a signal to the world, a visible marker of competence, sophistication, and readiness to participate in high society. The forbidden room was also an instrument of memory and storytelling. Generations of family achievements, connections, and missteps were encoded in its artifacts. Children were taught to interpret these objects. The placement of a vase hinted at a great-grandmother's travels, a paperweight commemorated a distant relative's marriage, a clock frozen at a precise hour evoked a significant historical event. In this way, the room served as a living archive, teaching history, lineage, and family identity without a single word spoken. Observing the arrangement of objects, understanding their placement, and respecting their history became a form of education as crucial as reading, arithmetic, or conversation. Perhaps most importantly, the forbidden room taught the value of restraint and desire. Its allure, the gleaming surfaces, intricate carvings, and delicate objects was carefully calibrated to provoke longing without permission. Children and adults alike learned that proximity did not confer ownership, that curiosity must be tempered with obedience, and that the value of something could be heightened precisely because it was untouchable. In a world of abundance, the Forbidden Room created scarcity, discipline, and focus, embedding lessons in patience and self-control that would carry into other areas of life. Ultimately, the Forbidden Room was a nexus of etiquette, history, discipline, and performance. It shaped behavior, instilled reverence, and conveyed the subtle yet powerful lessons of elite culture. From the careful steps taken to approach it, to the precise conduct required within its walls, to the invisible influence it cast across the rest of the household, the room was both teacher and symbol. It reminded family members, young and old, that privilege came with responsibility, that wealth and taste were inseparable from discretion, and that mastery of social codes was a lifelong pursuit. Through its presence, generations learned the art of controlled behavior, the importance of observation, and the subtle yet enduring power of inherited tradition. The Forbidden Room remained a silent overseer, a hallowed space of restraint and expectation, guiding behavior and shaping identity without uttering a word. In elite American households, it was the ultimate instrument of education, legacy, and performance, demanding respect, patience, and mindfulness. Every gesture, glance, and step outside its walls was colored by its authority, and those who learned its lessons carried the invisible weight of its standards throughout their lives. It was more than a room, it was a crucible of refinement, a repository of history, and a teacher whose lessons endured long after any visitor departed. In elite American circles, wealth was never shouted. It was never a trophy to be flaunted in overt displays or loud proclamations. The rich understood that true affluence existed not in the magnitude of your possessions, but in the subtlety with which they were implied. A casual mention of a vacation, a fleeting reference to a household item, or the soft sigh over a minor inconvenience could communicate more about a family's fortune than a parade of luxury ever could. Wealth, in these spaces, was whispered, woven delicately into conversation like an invisible silk thread. Anyone paying attention could detect it, but it required the sort of discernment that had been taught through generations of observation and subtle mimicry. In practice, this meant that conversations among the elite were a linguistic ballet. No one said, "We bought a new yacht." Instead, it might emerge gently, "We took the small yacht this summer." The larger one required maintenance. A seemingly casual comment, but it immediately conveyed far more than the words themselves. The listener, trained to interpret the nuance, understood the magnitude of the family's holdings without being clued in directly. The same principle applied to property, a remark like, "We are wintering out west this year." "The lodge is lovely after the holidays," implied ownership of a sprawling vacation estate without ever mentioning square footage or cost. Numbers, monetary or otherwise, were considered vulgar in this context, unnecessary and blunt. Instead, wealth was communicated through coded references, shared understanding, and a subtle performance of effort or inconvenience. This coded language extended to travel. The mere act of mentioning a vacation was not a description of leisure. It was a performance of hardship disguised as casual conversation. If someone remarked on a trip, it might be framed in terms of the challenges of logistics, the necessity of flying commercial because the private jet was undergoing maintenance, or the effort required to land a small plane on a grass strip. Even complaints about private beaches or under-polished fountains were structured to signal privilege, allowing listeners to understand that the problems described were luxuries beyond the reach of ordinary experience. Every word was calibrated. The goal was not to boast, but to let the attentive observer recognize the family's extraordinary circumstances and, through subtle implication, admire their wealth. Charity functions operated under the same principle. The wealthy rarely spoke about their giving in grandiose terms. Instead, they murmured in understated tones, emphasizing effort over impact and humility over results. "We have been quite busy with the foundation this season," might be said while wearing a slightly rumpled designer outfit, signaling industriousness without arrogance. Even minor setbacks became opportunities for a controlled display of endurance. A swimming pool slightly too long for water polo became evidence of dedication to physical fitness. A vacation home inconvenient to reach was recast as a demonstration of adaptability. Every anecdote, every complaint, every description was a precise performance meant to convey superiority without ostentation. Children were inducted into this linguistic culture from an early age. They were taught the art of indirect boasting, learning to convey privilege without naming it outright. A 6-year-old might say, "Nana's house is so big I get lost going to the tennis court," instead of directly stating that Nana owned a mansion. In adult company, these lessons matured into a finely tuned skill. Subtle hints replaced overt statements, coded references replaced numbers, and the tone of voice carried as much meaning as the words themselves. Breaking this code, speaking too directly, expressing enthusiasm too loudly, or mentioning monetary amounts was met with immediate social correction. A grandmother might clear her throat sharply, a hand would stir tea with the exacting precision of a surgeon, and the offender would recognize their misstep without explicit admonishment. This culture of subtlety extended to material possessions beyond property and travel. Clothing, accessories, and everyday objects were all instruments for displaying wealth discreetly. Outfits were selected not for fashion statements, but for appropriateness, lineage, and the silent communication of social literacy. The wrong shade, a minor mismatch, or an outdated accessory could undermine the careful construction of a family's image. Children learned early that even their pajamas needed to reflect a level of refinement surpassing ordinary adulthood, and that every article of clothing could become a vector for judgment or approval. Accessories such as jewelry were chosen for their provenance and story rather than ostentation, shoes were polished to a reflective gleam, and handkerchiefs were meticulously embroidered yet never used for ordinary purposes. Every detail contributed to a larger tapestry of understated elegance and coded wealth. The performance of wealth was inseparable from the etiquette of the household. Just as the correct fork or the proper posture could signify refinement, the precise modulation of conversation and behavior indicated social competence. A careless gesture, a loud statement, or the direct naming of a possession risked revealing ignorance of the nuanced social codes that governed elite circles. In this way, wealth was as much about behavior as it was about ownership. The ability to imply resources without directly stating them became a measure of social acumen, proving that an individual could navigate both privilege and discretion simultaneously. Even ordinary domestic life was orchestrated to reinforce these subtle hierarchies. Meals, gatherings, and leisure activities were designed to showcase refinement, composure, and self-discipline. Every interaction, whether it was passing the communal jam at breakfast, serving coffee, or walking through a drawing room, was a rehearsal in demonstrating wealth without display. The young learned through observation and repetition, internalizing the gestures, tones, and silences that communicated affluence without brashness. Mistakes, even minor ones, were corrected with understated precision. A sigh, a glance, a subtle shift in body language could remind someone that their performance was being evaluated continuously. This culture also shaped social interactions with outsiders. Visitors were subtly tested through observation. Could they recognize the coded language of luxury? Could they interpret the understated hints of privilege, or would they remain oblivious? Those who understood the unspoken signals were invited further into the social fold, their acceptance indicating both competence and awareness. Those who misread cues were gently excluded, guided by the tacit knowledge that wealth and refinement were inseparable from discretion, subtlety, and control. The stakes of these subtle displays extended into the realm of legacy. Demonstrating wealth appropriately was a rehearsal for inheritance, social positioning, and the maintenance of status across generations. Every child raised in these households was trained to perform this linguistic and behavioral dance, ensuring that the family's influence persisted not through force or ostentation, but through measured, controlled, and precise demonstration. Success in these performances was rewarded with inclusion in the social rituals, approval from elders, and access to privileges otherwise reserved for those who had mastered the unspoken code. Failure, even minor, could result in exclusion from events, reduction in social standing, or quiet censure that reinforced the importance of subtlety and self-control. In essence, the display of wealth in elite American circles was a performance of invisibility. The truly affluent never needed to prove their fortune through ostentation, for their audience was trained to perceive it through subtle cues, calibrated language, and measured gestures. It was a world where the careful positioning of a sentence, the discreet sigh of inconvenience, or a half-mention of a possession spoke volumes. Wealth existed not in numbers or loud claims, but in the refinement of behavior, the precision of implication, and the cultivation of observation. Those who mastered this art navigated society effortlessly, their fortune both known and respected without ever being explicitly quantified. To witness this subtlety was to see a different kind of power at work, one that relied on perception, discretion, and performance rather than authority or volume. It was a living curriculum in social intelligence, teaching children and adults alike that mastery of behavior, language, and presentation could communicate more about status than the display of wealth itself. Every gathering, conversation, and interaction became an opportunity to practice this art, reinforcing the unspoken rules that governed elite culture. It was, above all, a system designed to perpetuate advantage across generations, ensuring that refinement, subtlety, and discretion remained hallmarks of the truly affluent. In conclusion, the subtle display of wealth in these households was an exercise in precision, discipline, and performance. Every word, every gesture, and every interaction was carefully orchestrated to imply status without overt statement. Children learned from observation, adults performed with practiced ease, and outsiders were quietly tested for their awareness. This system reinforced the idea that true wealth was not measured in possessions, but in the capacity to convey privilege with discretion, mastery, and grace. In the quiet whispers, the half-mentions, and the understated anecdotes, the elite communicated not only their fortune but their understanding of the complex, nuanced social world they inhabited, a world where silence often spoke louder than speech, and subtlety was the ultimate currency of influence. In America's elite circles, clothing was far more than a necessity. It was a language, a code, and a tool for survival. Each garment carried with it messages about lineage, refinement, and awareness of social hierarchies. Dressing poorly, even by a single shade or misaligned accessory, could result in silent judgment that resonated throughout the room. In these circles, fashion was never casual, never spontaneous, and never purely personal. It was a performance with consequences. The moment one stepped out of the bedroom, the wardrobe ceased to be merely clothing and became a strategic apparatus, carefully calibrated to communicate both respect for tradition and awareness of social nuance. The morning routine began with a meticulous audit. Every outfit was scrutinized, inspected under the critical gaze of at least 2 generations of family, and sometimes even by the silent, omnipresent butler. A day outfit had to align with both the time of day and the family's mood, which itself was influenced by countless unseen factors: the matriarch's last night's rest, the subtle influence of the household's seasonal colors, or even the residual impressions left by a recent visitor. Afternoon attire was not merely a replacement of garments. It was a recalibration, a demonstration that one could transition gracefully from one sphere of social expectation to another. And the evening ensemble. That was a stage-ready presentation, designed to communicate poise, refinement, and an awareness of the unspoken rules that governed elite gatherings. Hats, gloves, and scarves were not optional accessories. They were weapons in the battle for social credibility. There were hats for walking, hats for sitting, hats for thinking, and hats whose purpose was purely ceremonial. Gloves were meticulously catalogued by thickness, color, and whether they had ever touched a doorknob. Scarves, delicate and strategic, could signal allegiance to particular clubs, schools, or even the prevailing aesthetic decreed by a family elder. Wearing the wrong scarf, in the wrong shade, at the wrong moment could create a subtle ripple of disapproval that was felt more acutely than any loud rebuke ever could. Every detail was assessed before leaving the private confines of the bedroom. Shoes had to be polished to a reflective gleam, matching the tone and texture of the outfit while remaining appropriate for the anticipated activity. Handkerchiefs were embroidered and folded precisely, never used for mundane purposes like blowing one's nose. Jewelry was carefully chosen not for ostentation but for its story, a bracelet passed down through generations, a cameo from a distant ancestor, or a ring that had survived revolutions abroad. These objects were worn to demonstrate taste, lineage, and knowledge of tradition, not merely to decorate the body. Even minor deviations from these expectations could have social consequences. A single visible zipper, a hat slightly tilted, or a color that did not align with the family's unwritten seasonal palette could become a topic of whispered commentary, a subtle mark against the wearer in the ongoing ledger of social competence. Children were educated early in the nuances of these signals, ensuring that from breakfast to bedtime, their clothing functioned as both armor and declaration, signaling adherence to the family's values while simultaneously conveying refinement and discipline. Preparing for outings was an exercise in logistics as well as aesthetics. Each departure required careful planning, the activity, the time of day, the expected social environment, and even the emotional state of influential family members were all considered before selecting an ensemble. Morning walks, afternoon teas, evening concerts, or casual visits to the library all demanded a specific wardrobe, with contingency outfits ready for unexpected weather changes or surprise visitors. The right ensemble communicated awareness, respect, and adaptability, while the wrong one could subtly undermine one's position, drawing invisible but unmistakable censure from observers trained to notice every infraction. The weight of these expectations extended beyond daily routines to seasonal migrations between homes. Summer and winter estates were treated as entirely separate ecosystems, each requiring its own wardrobe, set of accessories, and social conduct. Packing for these journeys was a careful orchestration. Valets and maids organized clothing by function, season, and contingency, while children and young adults learned the unspoken rules of preparation and presentation. The journey itself was a display of awareness. Arriving at a summer estate demanded a specific ensemble that balanced comfort, poise, and the implied recognition of the house's legacy. Each garment contributed to the performance, allowing the wearer to navigate new social spaces without signaling unfamiliarity or disrespect. Even casual moments were fraught with sartorial expectation. Sitting in a drawing room, attending a bridge game, or taking tea in a sunlit parlor all required precise alignment between posture, demeanor, and clothing. A stiff collar reinforced the alignment of the spine. A perfectly draped scarf indicated both refinement and subtle adherence to seasonal color schemes. Shoes, gloves, and jewelry were not mere accessories, they were tools of communication, transmitting nuanced messages about competence, awareness, and privilege. Every detail, from the crease in a trouser leg to the tilt of a hat, functioned as part of a broader social language that governed inclusion, status, and perceived refinement. Mistakes were met with subtle, yet unmistakable correction. A matriarch's raised eyebrow, a sigh from an elder, or the quiet glance of a butler could instantly signal that something had gone awry. These corrections were rarely overt. Instead, they were designed to reinforce awareness and guide the individual back into alignment with the expected norms. Children learned quickly that social survival depended not only on choosing the right outfit but also on understanding the silent grammar of approval and disapproval embedded in these interactions. A misstep could result in temporary exclusion from social activities, a subtle reduction in seating priority, or the quiet relegation to less prestigious areas of the family gathering. The stakes of clothing extended into reputation and legacy. How one dressed for public and private events could affect not only immediate perception but long-term social positioning. In these elite families, image and comportment were inseparable from inheritance, influence, and social capital. Mastery of dress signaled discipline, refinement, and respect for tradition, all of which were evaluated continuously by peers and elders. Failure to adhere to these expectations risked more than embarrassment. It threatened inclusion in the subtle networks that governed opportunities, alliances, and social acceptance. Yet, clothing was also a tool of empowerment within these rigid structures. Those who mastered the nuances of style and presentation could navigate social gatherings with confidence, conveying status, refinement, and competence without a single overt declaration. The right choice of outfit could signal subtle alignment with family values, demonstrate awareness of tradition, and communicate social intelligence in ways words never could. In this sense, clothing was both armor and instrument, allowing the wearer to operate effectively within a world governed by precision, observation, and nuanced judgment. Even rest and relaxation were governed by sartorial consideration. Evening routines required careful removal and storage of garments to maintain their condition for subsequent performances. Monogrammed robes were donned with care. Nightwear maintained its appearance, and every article of clothing was returned to its proper place. This diligence ensured that the next day's performance could begin without compromise, maintaining the delicate equilibrium of appearance, expectation, and refinement. In essence, clothing in elite circles was never about vanity. It was about survival, communication, and the perpetuation of social norms. Every garment, accessory, and detail functioned as part of a broader social code, signaling awareness, competence, and respect for hierarchy. Through clothing, individuals demonstrated not only their refinement but also their understanding of the invisible structures that governed elite life. Mastery of these sartorial expectations allowed one to move gracefully through complex social landscapes, while missteps could subtly erode status, influence, and inclusion. Ultimately, the art of dressing was inseparable from the art of living in these environments. Clothing functioned as both shield and signal, a tool for navigating unspoken rules and maintaining the delicate balance of appearance, behavior, and perception. In every thread, crease, and fold, there existed the potential to communicate lineage, awareness, and sophistication. To the untrained observer, the ensemble might seem elegant or extravagant, but to those initiated into the world of the elite, each choice was a deliberate statement, a rehearsal for social survival, and a carefully orchestrated performance designed to sustain privilege, refinement, and influence across generations. Through these meticulous rituals, clothing became a lens through which social order, hierarchy, and power were expressed. Success in this domain required observation, discipline, and subtlety, as well as an innate understanding that every outfit was both a shield and a declaration. Those who mastered this language could navigate society with grace, respect, and authority, while those who faltered risked the quiet but enduring consequences of misalignment with tradition and expectation. In elite circles, clothing was not simply worn. It was performed, evaluated, and perfected, a continuous exercise in social literacy, legacy, and survival. In the world of America's elite, the calendar was less a measure of months and days and more a reflection of geography and the rhythm of seasonal migrations. Memorial Day was not just a national observance. It was the official signal for a monumental logistical operation. Families moved between their winter homes, summer estates, and occasionally spring or autumn retreats with the precision of a military campaign, complete with wardrobes, household staff, and an inventory of every item that might be required for proper appearances. These migrations were not casual. They were ceremonial, steeped in tradition, and guided by rules that had often been passed down for generations. Every member of the household, from children to grandparents, understood that these movements were as much a test of discipline and awareness as they were practical relocations. Preparation for these seasonal transitions began weeks, sometimes months, in advance. Clothing was carefully catalogued, sorted, and packed by function and contingency. Valets and maids meticulously organized wardrobes by activity and weather, ensuring that each family member had the perfect ensemble for every anticipated occasion. Cooks prepared preserves, packed delicate ingredients, and sometimes crafted menus that would carry over from one house to another to maintain culinary continuity. Even the pets participated in the orchestration, with carriers, leashes, and toys packed with the same careful attention as silverware or antique linens. Missing a single detail could result in social faux pas upon arrival, making preparation an essential ritual rather than mere convenience. The journey itself was an exercise in decorum. Traveling between properties required a careful choreography of timing, appearance, and comportment. Family members were expected to present themselves with grace, even in transit, demonstrating poise and refinement that reflected the values of their household. Vehicles were chosen for both comfort and status. Luggage was monogrammed to signal ownership and lineage, and every interaction with staff or fellow travelers was governed by etiquette. Even the act of entering a carriage or automobile was a studied gesture, designed to maintain composure, display elegance, and communicate awareness of one's place within the family hierarchy. Arrival at a seasonal estate was a ceremonial event in itself. The caretaker, who had been preparing the home for months, greeted the family with precise instructions and a meticulous presentation of the house's interior. Windows were opened to circulate air, furniture arranged according to tradition, and heirlooms dusted or polished to maintain their pristine appearance. The scent of old wood, mothballs, and faint traces of prior seasons mingled with the delicate aroma of cleaning products and polish, creating an olfactory signature unique to each estate. Family members were expected to respect this carefully curated environment, moving through rooms with deliberation and restraint, acknowledging the legacy embedded in every object and architectural detail. Once inside, the estate became a stage on which each household member performed their roles. Rooms had designated purposes: libraries for silent reflection, drawing rooms for formal conversation, dining halls for meticulously timed meals. Furniture, often antique and deliberately unyielding, demanded attentiveness to posture and etiquette. The process of navigating each space reinforced the values of discipline, observation, and respect for hierarchy. Even casual behaviors, such as walking across a hall or settling onto a sofa, were governed by rules designed to communicate awareness and deference. The estate itself became an immersive classroom in social survival, teaching the young and reminding the old of the unspoken expectations that underpinned elite life. Pets, too, were trained to navigate these rituals with decorum. Dogs and cats, accustomed to the unyielding order of these households, behaved with an almost regal poise, understanding the invisible boundaries that define spaces, such as forbidden rooms or display areas. A pet that misstepped risked a quiet rebuke in the form of a sharp glance or gentle correction, reinforcing the household's insistence on composure and propriety. In this way, every resident, human or animal, participated in the maintenance of order and the projection of refinement, contributing to the seamless operation of the estate as both home and social theater. Every act within these estates, from dining to reading to casual movement, was suffused with symbolism. Chairs, tables, and even minor decorative items carried implicit instructions, requiring awareness of their purpose and correct interaction. A misplaced napkin, a chair used improperly, or a decorative item touched without permission could trigger silent but potent consequences, signaling a lapse in decorum to attentive observers. These standards, while often invisible to outsiders, were enforced rigorously, serving as markers of social competence and adherence to family tradition. Seasonal migrations also carried educational and developmental implications for children. Young heirs and heirs in training learned the rhythms of these household rituals as part of their upbringing, internalizing the values of patience, attentiveness, and adaptability. They observed adults navigating complex social scenarios, memorized the proper handling of objects, and practiced composure in ways that were both subtle and continuous. Even seemingly minor experiences, such as unpacking a trunk or selecting an outfit for a specific activity, were lessons in discipline, inheritance, and cultural literacy. Children who mastered these routines gained confidence and social fluency, while those who faltered learned early that mistakes, however minor, could carry consequences that affected inclusion and reputation. The estates themselves were living entities in this social ecosystem. Each had its own rules, its own furniture arrangements, and its own history that demanded recognition. Windows, doors, and floors bore the marks of generations, and family members learned to navigate these spaces with reverence. The architecture, furniture, and decor were not merely functional. They were performative, conveying legacy, taste, and authority. In this way, seasonal migration was not merely about moving between homes. It was a continuous rehearsal in spatial awareness, social intelligence, and disciplined comportment. Meals at these estates mirrored the broader principles of performance and ritual. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were orchestrated events, each with its own expectations for dress, posture, and interaction. Silverware, china, and serving pieces were handled according to precise rules, while conversation was carefully curated to avoid impropriety or unseemly displays of emotion. Staff members, who were highly trained in the subtle codes of conduct, ensured that each moment proceeded smoothly, guiding family members and guests through rituals that were as much about reinforcing hierarchy as they were about sustenance. Even leisure activities were structured and codified. Tennis courts, gardens, drawing rooms, and libraries were all arenas for observation and subtle judgment. Clothing choices, movement, and engagement with each space conveyed information about taste, refinement, and understanding of tradition. Activities were often designed to reinforce social values, whether through competition, demonstration of skill, or simple adherence to expected behaviors. Through these routines, the seasonal estate functioned as a microcosm of elite society, providing a controlled environment in which status, propriety, and legacy were continuously enacted and reinforced. Ultimately, seasonal migration in elite American households was far more than logistical planning. It was a living practice of social performance. Every garment, object, and gesture contributed to a carefully orchestrated display of refinement, awareness, and discipline. From the moment the family departed their winter residence to the ceremonial arrival at the summer estate, each step was imbued with meaning and evaluated by both peers and tradition. The estates themselves became instruments of social education, shaping behavior, reinforcing hierarchy, and ensuring the continuity of values that defined elite society. This constant movement cultivated an understanding of space, legacy, and ritual that became second nature to those raised within these households. Family members learned that their environment was an extension of social hierarchy, that every object held significance, and that mastery of these spaces was inseparable from the projection of status and refinement. Seasonal migration was therefore not simply a transition between physical locations but a continuous exercise in social literacy, performance, and survival. Every return to a familiar estate reinforced the lessons learned, while each arrival at a new property provided an opportunity to demonstrate awareness, grace, and adherence to tradition. Through these carefully choreographed movements, elite families maintained continuity, reinforced hierarchy, and cultivated a sense of identity that was inseparable from both place and practice. The estates, staff, and rituals together created an ecosystem in which every detail mattered, and mastery of these details conferred both status and belonging. Seasonal migration, then, was not merely a practical necessity. It was a complex, immersive experience in social intelligence, spatial awareness, and the disciplined performance of refinement, ensuring that each member of the household could navigate the intricate landscape of elite society with poise, grace, and confidence. In elite American circles, wealth was never loudly proclaimed. It was never broadcast with banners or flamboyant gestures. True affluence moved with subtlety, hidden in plain sight, and revealed only to those who were trained to perceive its nuances. The rich did not announce their accomplishments or possessions. They implied them with a quiet confidence that left observers piecing together clues. A casual remark about a summer trip could reveal an entire portfolio of homes. A single nod toward the garden might hint at private sculptors or landscape designers, and a barely audible comment about wine could indicate cellars that would be the envy of a boutique vineyard. Each statement, each gesture, each pause in conversation was a carefully calibrated signal. Those who understood the language of privilege could read between the lines, while outsiders often walked away oblivious, assuming the world of luxury was simple or understated, when in reality it was deeply coded. Everything in elite households was designed to communicate refinement without overt exposition. Furniture, art, and decor were meticulously chosen to display taste, lineage, and access to resources. A crystal vase might appear innocuous, but its origin in a famous European workshop carried unspoken messages about connections and experience. Paintings, arranged with intentionality, conveyed heritage, sophistication, and the family's curated aesthetic. Even the placement of a chair or the selection of a tablecloth spoke volumes. These silent signals were layered, meant to be interpreted only by those familiar with the codes, reinforcing social boundaries and affirming status through observation rather than proclamation. Clothing and accessories were another arena for understated communication. Apparel was never simply worn. It was deployed strategically to indicate awareness of tradition, seasonal appropriateness, and access to luxury. The fabrics were carefully selected to demonstrate subtlety rather than flamboyance: silks, fine wools, and linens in muted colors that implied refinement rather than ostentation. Jewelry was inherited or purposefully chosen to carry stories of lineage, connections, or historical events. Even the smallest accessory, a scarf, a brooch, a pair of gloves, served as a visual cue, signaling education, taste, and sometimes quiet affiliations to clubs, schools, or societies. Children learned early that each outfit was a test, not merely of aesthetics, but of social intelligence. Choosing the wrong shade, the wrong cut, or the wrong accessory could result in disapproval that rippled through the household with subtle but palpable force. The art of conversation itself was a silent exhibition of wealth. Discussions of travel, property, or hobbies were carefully curated to imply resources without ever quantifying them. One might speak of a ski trip not in terms of a resort or a lodge, but as a casual reference to a European chalet tucked in an alpine valley. A yacht might be described only in its needs for maintenance, never in its size or cost. Attentive listeners absorbed these hints, piecing together a portrait of affluence that required both subtlety and discretion. Talking too directly about possessions or finances was considered gauche. The language of privilege relied on implication, metaphor, and the unspoken understanding that abundance was both assumed and invisible unless carefully revealed. Even dining was a theater of silent status. The manner in which one handled cutlery, wineglasses, and plates conveyed refinement and training. Using the correct fork for fish, the proper spoon for soup, And the subtle gestures required when passing condiments were all part of a disciplined performance that demonstrated awareness of social codes. Conversation during meals was carefully moderated. Topics were safe, polished, and often designed to suggest knowledge of travel, art, literature, and etiquette without appearing boastful. Every movement at the table was observed, remembered, and interpreted as a reflection of upbringing, education, and social intelligence. In these moments, wealth was articulated not in currency but in behavior, poise, and cultivated subtlety. Even the homes themselves were silent instruments of communication. Grand estates were filled with objects whose presence, arrangement, and condition broadcasted social capital. A well-maintained garden, a curated library, or a collection of rare art did not just indicate wealth, it signaled taste, discernment, and adherence to tradition. Rooms were arranged to demonstrate restraint, order, and lineage, and every decorative object had a backstory, often unknown to casual visitors but understood within the family or social circle. Entryways, hallways, and reception rooms became stages where visitors were subtly evaluated based on how they navigated these spaces. A hesitant step, a careless glance, or a misinterpretation of an object's placement could inadvertently reveal inexperience or unfamiliarity with elite norms, while mastery of these silent cues confirmed belonging and competence. Gifts and charity were also carefully choreographed expressions of status. Donations were rarely publicized. They were communicated quietly, almost invisibly, through the medium of events, introductions, or subtle acknowledgement. A family's generosity might be suggested through the organization of a gala, the provision of exclusive resources, or the patronage of institutions, but always in a manner that allowed others to recognize it without direct proclamation. The wealthy understood that true influence was shown through participation, impact, and discretion, not through overt advertisement. Even the presentation of oneself through attire, posture, and manners served as a signal that reinforced credibility, reliability, and inherited sophistication. Travel, both domestic and international, followed these same principles. Trips were framed as casual remarks, small inconveniences, or reflections on routine, but each implied resources, connections, and access to experiences unavailable to the ordinary observer. A brief mention of a winter estate or summer retreat was loaded with unspoken information about networks, influence, and opportunity. Children learned to navigate these cues early, mastering the art of subtle boasting without ever appearing to boast, and adults refined the skill into a language of power and discretion. In elite circles, the louder you spoke about wealth, the less credible you became. True status was always suggested, never shouted. Even leisure objects, from cars to boats to pets, were part of this silent display. Vehicles were chosen for lineage, brand, and subtle cues about taste, rather than sheer opulence. Pets were trained to reflect composure and dignity, moving through spaces with a careful grace that mirrored their owner's expectations. Recreational activities were conducted with an air of refinement. Casual mishaps, like a poorly aimed golf swing or a mismanaged tennis serve, were minimized, often to preserve the illusion of effortless competence. These performances, whether conscious or instinctive, reinforced the household status narrative, demonstrating not only possession but the education and discipline required to wield privilege with poise. Even mistakes became a form of silent communication. A minor social blunder, a lapse in posture, or a small violation of protocol could subtly reveal inexperience, upbringing, or ignorance of nuance. Observers took note, integrating these signals into the broader understanding of the individual's place within the social hierarchy. Conversely, flawless performance in minor, invisible rituals, pouring tea correctly, passing a dish gracefully, acknowledging guests with measured charm reaffirmed status and confirmed belonging. The language of wealth in these households was thus cumulative, built from countless small gestures. observations, and rituals that required attention, memory, and discretion to decode and perform correctly. Ultimately, the silent display of wealth and status in elite circles was a masterclass in subtlety, discretion, and the power of implication. Objects, behavior, conversation, and environment all intertwined to create a network of signals that could only be fully understood by the initiated. Wealth was not flaunted, it was inferred, suggested, and performed. Mastery of this language required years of observation, practice, and awareness of both history and context. Each member of the household, from the youngest child to the matriarch, participated in this ongoing performance, demonstrating refinement through every gesture, every word, and every movement. To live successfully in these circles was to become fluent in a silent, intricate dialect, one that celebrated composure, taste, and discretion above all else. By the end of each day, it was clear that wealth among America's elite was less about what one owned and more about how one moved, spoke, and existed within the structures of privilege. Every glance, every nod, every understated comment carried meaning, signaling lineage, education, and cultivated taste. True status was invisible to the untrained eye, manifesting only in the recognition of those who knew what to observe. In these households, luxury was not loud. It was practiced quietly, meticulously, and perpetually, ensuring that each household member internalized the lessons of discretion, refinement, and the silent art of living richly without ever appearing to need recognition. As we step back and look at the world of America's elite, it becomes clear that wealth is not merely a matter of money or possessions, it is a language, a performance, and a carefully maintained set of rituals. From the precise placement of cutlery at breakfast to the subtle inflections in conversation, from the stiffness of posture to the quiet choreography of clothing and accessories, every detail signals belonging, discipline, and legacy. These households operate like intricate ecosystems, where every glance, every gesture, every whispered remark carries weight and meaning, reinforcing social hierarchies in ways invisible to outsiders. The richness of this world lies not in ostentation but in the mastery of subtlety, the silent communication of status, and the relentless attention to protocol and presentation. It is a life where manners are weaponized, decor is coded, and even the act of breathing in the right room requires training. And yet, beneath all this refinement and ritual, there is a strangely human story. It is a story of discipline and expectation, of inherited rules that shape behavior across generations, of children learning the invisible codes of privilege, and adults performing mastery in spaces where every misstep is noted. It is a glimpse into a society where luxury is invisible unless you know how to read it, and where the greatest power lies in subtlety, poise, and the quiet ability to navigate a labyrinth of social signals that span decades and even centuries. So the next time you sip your coffee without fear of a butler's judgment, lounge on a sofa without worrying about ancestral eyes, or wear mismatched socks just because you feel like it, take a moment to appreciate the freedom to live outside these meticulously structured worlds. There is a certain charm in being able to exist without ceremony, to enjoy the simple pleasures without calculation, and to embrace the chaos of everyday life with all its imperfections. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the strange, fascinating, and often daunting etiquette of America's elite. If you enjoyed this deep dive, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep your shoulders back, your cutlery in order. And remember that sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the greatest stories.